Welcome to another GM Tips. GM Rick here, sitting with Mini GM. She's watching little Sophia while I get to talk with you guys today. So, one of the things I wanted to go back over and discuss a little bit is helping your characters to create player characters that are memorable for both you and the players. Now, there are different ways you can approach this, and again, I don't know if there's any one set way that is absolutely right. I'm not about absolutes, and especially when it comes to game mastering or DMing, there are so many different ways you can approach it. And you've got to look at what's successful with your party, your players, your player personalities to see what works. So we're not going to do a deep dive into that. What we are going to talk a little bit about is working with your players to come up with realistic ideas that both are exciting for you as a GM and exciting for them as a player. I'll give you a perfect example and kind of start this a little bit with an example. As you guys know, I'm playing Reign of Winter right now and running that with my players, which we have a party of 6 that runs within that setting. Now, we started with that. We're down to 5 players that are consistently there each week. So with a party of 5, I've got very diverse personalities, and fortunately I've come up with some very good people in my campaign to really work with, and their ideas are not always that outrageous. However, I've had a player that really wants to look at doing a Warforged type of character from 3.5 in a Pathfinder setting. So we were trying to look at different ideas, and the really neat thing is that the player really dug in and realized there was not such a thing as a Warforged. However, there were Gearforged, which are the kind of a clockwork version of a Warforged. And there are some other things like Weirwood creatures, Ironforged, and some other different types of things that have come up through third-party material. So we got to talking a little bit because, again, I like to play Inner Sea setting campaign type of classes and races, and I'm pretty open when it comes to those. However, I do have some simple rules, and one of the things I really want to do is have it run by me to make sure that it doesn't overpower a character for a beginning first level campaign. So the neat thing, and I guess in saying this is, I didn't say no outright to him. Could a Warforged be a powerful character that ends up shifting the balance? Of course it can. And it offers something that doesn't need to sleep, eat, or do other types of things that normal sentient creatures and beings have to do. So it does have to do a little bit of rest because there is a downtime for everything. The neat thing about this is that we were willing to look at options. We looked at the Android options. We looked at other options because he really wants that. He really loves the race of the Warforged, and he really wanted to do something like that. And so in that saying, one of the neat things that I really love about this campaign, and I don't know why it's a little bit green on the screen. Maybe some weird things are going on with my camera. One of the things that I really wanted to make sure is that I didn't limit the player to the point of where they don't have fun running something they want to run in the campaign. And I think that's my first thing that I would say to any GM. Try to work with your players on their concepts and ideas. You don't have to give in to everything as a GM. You don't have to say yes to every incredible min-max build that your min-maxers want to do. You don't have to go with some very silly ideas that are way out there that you go, yeah. But you do have to have flexibility. And that's one of the things I would say of any GM or DM. Flexibility is really a key item. Sorry about that. I got to get this camera to kind of focus the right way. It's doing some weird things, I think, with this setting here that I'm sitting in. So keep in mind that you as the GM or DM really, shifting again to get this to center. There we go. You have to really sit down and take a look at what works for you as a GM or DM. But you have to have some flexibility because otherwise you are really pigeonholing your players and limiting them from having great ideas that can really influence a campaign in a positive way and make some really memorable player characters. So that's the first thing, a little bit of flexibility on both sides. Now, again, to the player, I say you need to have some flexibility to your GM as well. You don't need to overwhelm them. You don't need to take her and just pummel her about ideas that you think are great and awesome that may not fit with the type of setting or challenge that she or he is putting you into. Again, you've got to be really open-minded to suggestions from the GM and DM, because he might turn around and do something that gives you something even better than what you were planning, but because at first the idea kind of sounds cockeyed to you, you really just don't want to grab onto it. So I would say that, in your passions for making characters, just really look at it and say, does this race fit? Does this class fit? Does this build fit for what we need to do? Second to the DM or GM, decide on how you create the stats. Come up with one common way that your players can work with, or two options that don't overpower them. And players, you need to be real open about your GM seeing what you're putting into your character. You don't need to hide them from your GM. You don't need to not turn them in at the end of a session so that the GM can take a look at what's going on with the build and see if everything makes sense and that all the things are adding up. It's not our job to police everything you do, but GM, DM, you've got to take a look at their character sheets. You have to make sure that they're running things the right way, especially when numbers don't add up, when roles don't add up, when role play doesn't add up. And again, this is for more of a mechanics-based system. In the Open Legend RPG and in some of the other RPGs, you may not be as limited with that. Like in Numenera, you can get a little bit more flexibility of what you want to do. And you really don't have to be as rigid when it comes to the rules. But just really look at it depending on the campaign material you're trying to run. Have a great background story. And really you need to help your players with the background story, especially if you're doing your own campaign where there's going to be challenges, where they're going to be in a certain area of the world. You have to help them to understand a little bit of back history of the area, what cities work. One of the things I appreciate in Reign of Winter is my players all said, hey, Rick, you want us to be from Taldor. Help us to understand where there would be this, where there would be that. My character wants to be this. My character wants to be that. And we were able to do that because of it. We were able to really work with it in a way that made cohesive sense for their stories. And that was a great thing. So that was one of the things that we really looked at. The other thing we did that was really important was that we looked at defining events in the character's history. Upcoming, I've got one of my players that wants to play a hobgoblin. And in playing a hobgoblin, there are challenges with that. Where in the world would they be from? Where would they go from? So, hang on here. I've got to stop this real quick for Mini GM. And then go back to, how about, do you want to do the Noble Knight or 3 Sophia episodes? Or heck.
Sophia 3 episodes.
Okay, that's the last one. We're going to do the 3-episode compilation. You got it, kiddo. All right. So, you really have to... We took into account why would she be where she was in the world and what drove her to her class choice. Because she had traumatic events that happened in her life that really set her against certain types of classes and types of NPCs. And so we had to look at that and how would she integrate with other types of races, classes, and area locals. So that was a key. One of my players wanted to play a neutral evil character. And again, not neutral evil because they're a sadistic murderer, but because they came up in an area and region where they were oppressed. And because of the oppression, they had to fight off for freedom the oppressor forces. And this happened to be in Osirian, where they're wanting to go. Well, these oppressor forces kind of drove his character to very shady practices to get rid of the oppressor. So not always in this case are they going to be good. Sometimes it's going to make them go to an evil way of handling things just because they don't value any of the lives and are willing to do whatever it takes to drive the oppressor out. So his character is going to be more of a neutral evil ninja type. And I like that because he came to me with his idea and said, Rick, how does it work? Can I do a rogue this way? Would some other class work better? And because of it, we've got some ideas. Now, which one he'll choose is up to him. He might do an alchemist. He might do a rogue. He might do something else. So it's interesting to see what he will do with that character. But I gave him latitude. And we discussed it. We discussed it for the setting that he wants to be in. So keep this in mind. As you work with your players, you have to give away some of the setting. You have to help them to design something that's going to fit in the setting and the scope of things. You still want to give them creative latitude. But this way, then, they come up with characters that better fit the story you're trying to throw them into. So keep that in mind. You really do want to help your players with that. You don't want to pigeonhole them. You don't want to railroad them. But you do want to help them by giving them options that make sense for the type of setting and letting them choose. That's something else you can do there. Help them with understanding basically the history of how they will come together. Because a lot of times GMs will just throw player characters into a mishmash of you already know each other, or this happened or that happened. I kind of like the idea that they meet somewhere and get to know each other, and I let them have that interaction. I just sit back and provide a little round of the story, and I let them talk to each other about each other and get to know each other. And so it's like they really are meeting for the first time. Even though the players know each other, the characters don't. So I let them have that interaction, that little bit of rubbing and just conflict that goes on because they are from different backgrounds. But it also draws them together and knits them together in a way that works. And then it's not forced by a GM. The GM met in a bar. And everything doesn't have to be that way. Maybe they accepted a contract. Maybe they were invited for an event and ran into each other at an event and saw how other things were forming up, and they saw each other across the room and they just wanted to talk to each other. So there's different ways you can look at it. Even with my NPCs, I come up with 4 or 5 NPCs that may adventure with them, or they may choose to have none adventure with them. It is up to them. Sometimes they need to fill holes, and I put NPCs in there that would help fit those holes. But again, I don't take over the whole story with the NPC to where the NPC is running the players where I want them to go. The NPC is support. Sometimes a friend, sometimes a lover, sometimes other things, but they are support. They are not my character to run in that campaign, though sometimes they become that. That's not why I'm trying to do it. So keep that in mind, that as you do this background and the setting coming together, give them many options to work with. Let them pick a profession. That's my 4th idea. Pick a useful profession or fun profession that can gather information, gather them some extra cash, build notoriety, build credibility, and build them other things. This goes along with what I said in the downtime stuff on my downtime video, and what do you do in player downtime. Having that background and having that profession gives them skills sets. And again, you may want to help them to choose from a plethora of ones that would best fit the campaign. You don't want to have a sailor necessarily in the middle of a desert. It doesn't help them when they can't use their ship skills to sail in a desert, unless you have wind ships that go across the desert. Or unless you have star things like a charter or a navigator that they can look and guide the party from their navigation skills. So there are some things you can do with that, but really look at that, because sometimes those back professions are some of the most fun things and can add extra role points to skills and understanding that wouldn't have otherwise come to pass. So keep that in mind when you do that. Sometimes you want to maybe allow them to have an ancestral item that was handed down from their family of value. This can be a masterwork or a higher quality item that you normally wouldn't get. I normally don't hand out magic items in the beginning, things like that. But I might give them something that is unique and driven towards the story. Like, for instance, our paladin in the current campaign, Rothar. Rothar has a katana. It was just a nice masterwork katana. Well, it's also his deity's, he also uses it towards his deity and freeing people. So it has become a keen katana that is very sharp and opens a critical threat. But it didn't start that way. It started out as a simple masterwork katana that then he took it and made it into the magic item he wanted. Instead of having to go find one, buy one, he made it into the weapon of his choice. Now, it's kept him from grabbing other weapons from adventures, but that's okay. That's what he wanted. And so I gave him a path to get to where he wanted. It wasn't easy. He didn't get it yesterday. It was almost 7th or 8th level before he got it to where he wanted it. But he finally got the item that fit his personality, fit his story, and fit the different things. So you can do these kind of things with them. Keep that in mind. It goes back to that storyline of giving them something to work with. Makes it a better adventure, and it does. So keep that in mind. Don't try to push your casters and other characters into offensive roles. Let them use their skills, their charm, their personality to disarm and defeat people too. Perfect example, Damien's a sorcerer that is an enchanter. He is a enchanting sorcerer. He uses his wit, his come-on lines, his personality, his charisma to help the baddies to agree with his point of view. In this case, he dominated some Dracolisks and sent them after these Frostdrakes and their riders, their sorcerer riders. Well, guess what? When they hit you with the stoning ability, because you're the oppressor, as he put it, go after your oppressors, and they were. They're 3 intelligence creatures that were oppressed, and oppressors to them were the people that forced them to do what they were doing currently. So they turned around and basically turned 7 key baddies to stone because they failed miserably on their roles. I failed miserably as a GM. Guess what? I don't take that badly and then lie and say, ooh, but they succeeded. Nope, they fell out of the sky and broke like statues. And it was hilarious. And it saved the party some more PPK deaths. Because had they had to face these creatures without what he did, they probably would have died in sheer combat. So he didn't use a lot of spells or other things. He just used his charm to use a spell-like ability that charms and dominates to have them fight for him. Mesmerist class are the same way. If you ever play those in Pathfinder, they're kind of the illusionist beguilers of 3.5. You remember 3.5 and the beguilers for D&D? They use their charm and wit and illusions to direct creatures a certain direction. Well, that's kind of what the Mesmerist build is. It's a spellcaster that is all about charm and illusion and using that to get away with things and forcing opponents to believe things that may not be true. But the Mesmerist wants them to be true so that they can implant suggestions. And it's greatness. Because again, they're not a very combat-oriented class, but they are very just think outside the box-ish. So they don't have to run into combat all the time, but because they have others do it for them, or they set it up so their fellow players can win battles, they get XP for it, the full XP, just as if they defeated the creature. So keep in mind, there are some ways that you can help your players to do different things if you understand the classes, and that's the 5th thing I would say. Understand the classes, the archetypes, the prestige classes, and the builds of your game. Or even if you don't have them, how to take a core class that you have and build it in such a way that it will meet what they're trying to meet if they had these things available to them. So for Open Legend and Numenera, you may have to do some of that. Same way with Deadlands, Reloaded, and some others. A martial type may not be a straight martial. Maybe they are something a little bit more. Maybe they're paladin-like in their abilities. Maybe they're much more shady in their dealings. So they're able to use skills and feats that wouldn't be normally too available to that class, but because you're trying to help them to achieve their build, you give them a little flexibility. I'll give you this if we take away this. Okay, that sounds great. I love that. So help them to come up with builds. In D&D, you can make your own prestige classes and your own archetypes, or archetypes. You really want to set it up in a way that the builds aren't the same old every time. And so help them to do that. Come up with abilities that make sense, that aren't too powerful, but yet can get you to where you want to be when it comes to these things. So these are all some different things when it comes to setting things up. I say to GMs, quit being draconic. Don't, and not dragon draconic, but draconian in how you do things, marching lockstep. You don't have to. You don't have to be the absolute word. I know we're so often told we are the end word in a game. Yes, we are. But don't always assert that, because you're going to cause players to really not enjoy the sessions that you're running. Give them some ability to choose. Let them choose the unthinking hero that you would have not normally expected in the campaign. Yes, you're always going to have some meat shields. Yes, you're always going to have some finesse types. But there are other builds in between that normally players may not want to play. Maybe it's the reluctant healer who's out there trying to heal the world of all its woes and suffering. Maybe it's the beguiling mistress or mister that beguiles people to want to do what they say and change the world to be a better or worse place. These are all different things you can do. Maybe it's the diabolical priest. Maybe it's the trickster priest. Maybe it's the fae that decided to take a human form, but they're really fae, and you wouldn't have known otherwise. There's so many different things you can do. So I thank you for bearing with me for about 22, 23 minutes on this. But we'll call this topic helping your players to create the kind of characters they want to know and play. And this is really what it will be about, folks, is getting this to happen. Because I think as you do this, you're going to succeed at a level of GMing you normally wouldn't have. Thanks again for watching this GM Tips. GM Rick out.